The office clock ticked at 2 p.m. The sound was sharp, rhythmic, and entirely indifferent to the tension building in the room. Mark sat at his desk, his eyes fixed on the glowing rows of a spreadsheet. He did not hear her approach until the shadow fell across his screen. Sarah leaned in close. She whispered a suggestion about his project, a soft, deliberate sequence of words that seemed helpful on the surface. She smiled, then turned and walked away. Mark remained still. A sudden, cold knot tightened in his stomach, pulling at his breath. Nothing she said was loud. Nothing she said could be reported to a supervisor. Yet the air in the room felt heavy, as if the oxygen had been replaced by something thicker. He looked at the empty space where she had been standing. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was tactical. He realized then that this was not a disagreement. It was the start of a slow, calculated erosion of his professional standing. He gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles turning white as the realization set in. The game had begun. The conference room was cold, the air sterile. Mark stood at the head of the table, projecting the data they had finalized just yesterday. He spoke with confidence, laying out the parameters clearly for the team. Then, Sarah shifted in her chair. She did not raise her hand. She simply interrupted, her voice steady and loud enough to cut through the room. "That is not what we discussed, Mark. You are misremembering the parameters." The words landed like lead. The room went quiet. Every head turned toward him. Mark felt his pulse quicken, a sharp, rhythmic thud against his ribs. He looked at Sarah, but her expression was blank, expectant. The doubt hit him instantly, a physical sting that made his skin prickle. He searched his memory for the meeting from the day before, but the weight of the collective gaze made his thoughts scatter. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. He gripped the edge of the table, his fingers digging into the wood, fighting the urge to react with anger. The trap was set, and the room was waiting for him to stumble. Mark did not shout. He did not defend his memory with frantic words. Instead, he forced his breathing to slow, counting the seconds until his heart rate leveled out. He looked at the team, then back at Sarah, whose gaze remained fixed and challenging. He reached for his laptop, the metal cool beneath his palms. He opened the lid with a steady, deliberate motion. He typed, his fingers moving with clinical precision, summarizing the exact parameters they had agreed upon. He hit send. The notification chime echoed softly in the quiet conference room, a small, digital punctuation mark. "To ensure we are all aligned, I have just sent a recap of our previous agreement to everyone via email," he said. Sarah's expression flickered. He closed his laptop, the click final and absolute. The director sat at the front of the room, nodding as Sarah clicked through her presentation. Mark leaned back, his eyes scanning the screen. Then he saw it. A graph. A specific, complex market trend analysis he had spent 3 nights perfecting. It was his work, presented as her own. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thick with the hum of the projector. He did not storm the stage. He did not raise his voice. He waited, his hands folded neatly on his lap, watching the director lean in, impressed by the data. When the presentation ended and the floor opened for questions, Mark stood up. He walked to the center of the aisle, his posture relaxed but firm. "I am glad you found my recent analysis on market trends useful, Sarah," he said, his voice carrying clearly to the back of the room. Sarah froze. Mark did not look at her. He looked directly at the director. "I have the full raw data set here if the director needs deeper insights into the methodology." The room shifted. By claiming ownership through visibility, Mark transformed a moment of theft into a public display of his own expertise. The silence in Mark's inbox became a tactical signal. Monday passed without an invite to the project sync. Tuesday, the weekly strategy session went ahead without his presence. He checked his calendar, then his spam folder. Sarah was tightening the perimeter, attempting to starve him of the information necessary to perform his role. Mark did not send a frustrated email. He did not ask why he had been left off the list. He simply waited for the scheduled start time. He pushed the door open 5 minutes before the session began. Sarah looked up, her eyes narrowing as she saw him pull out an empty chair. He did not wait for an invitation. "I noticed I was not on the invite, but I have the critical updates for this project, so I am joining. He had bypassed the gatekeeper entirely. By showing up, he made it impossible for her to pretend he didn't exist. The shift was not sudden, but it was absolute. Sarah stopped the casual check-ins. The brief, friendly banter in the break room vanished, replaced by a sharp, professional distance that felt like a wall. She looked through him during meetings, her gaze sliding past his face as if he were part of the office furniture. Mark watched this transition with detached interest. He realized that the warmth she had shown him previously was not mentorship, it was allure. She had used his personal stories and his moments of doubt as leverage, gathering information to map his weaknesses. He did not chase her for an explanation. Instead, he pulled back. He stopped sharing his weekend plans. When she attempted to draw him into a private conversation, he responded with clinical, neutral facts about his current tasks. He was no longer a person to be manipulated. He was a professional entity, contained and unreachable. Mark codified his defense into 5 ironclad rules. He no longer operated on trust. He operated on record. Every critical conversation ended with a summary email sent to all stakeholders. He kept his laptop open, his fingers poised to document every verbal directive the moment it was uttered. When Sarah approached his desk, her voice dropped to a conspiratorial tone, urging him to approve a budget shift. Without reviewing the underlying data, he did not flinch. He looked at the clock, then back at her, his expression entirely devoid of reaction. "I require the full report before I can authorize any changes," he stated, his voice flat and devoid of urgency. She leaned in, trying to manufacture pressure with a tight, impatient smile, but he simply turned back to his monitor. "Send the documentation over. I will review it when I have time to be thorough." He refused to be rushed. He refused to be baited. The fog that had clouded his professional judgment simply evaporated. Mark sat at his desk, watching the office flow around him, and realized the power dynamics had inverted. Sarah walked past his cubicle, her pace slightly hurried, her eyes darting toward him for a reaction that never came. He did not look up. He did not offer a nod. He remained focused on the screen, his fingers moving across the keys with steady, rhythmic intent. The confusion that once kept him awake at night was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. He understood now that manipulation required a partner to play the game of doubt. By refusing to provide that doubt, he had effectively deleted her influence from his reality. When she stopped at his desk to drop a stack of files, expecting him to engage in a debate over priorities, he simply reached out, took the files, and placed them in his to-review tray without a word. No defense, no justification, no emotion. He was the architect of his own schedule. The office was no longer a battlefield. It was a landscape he had finally mapped. Mark stood up, gathered his notes, and walked toward the conference room for the final meeting of the quarter. He did not check to see if Sarah was watching. He did not wait for an invitation. He walked with the deliberate pace of a man who knew exactly where he was going. The air felt different now, stripped of the heavy, suffocating tension. He reached the door, opened it, and stepped inside, taking his seat at the head of the table. He pulled his laptop out, connected to the projector, and began the presentation. His voice was steady. His data was precise. There was no room for doubt, no space for manipulation, and no interest in the games that had once threatened to derail his progress. He had outgrown the cycle of reaction and defense. He was no longer a participant in their narrative. He was the author of his own. As the meeting concluded, he packed his bag, nodded to the director, and walked out of the building into the cool air of the late afternoon. He did not look back at the windows of the office. He did not think about the past. He walked toward the parking lot, his mind already fixed on the next project. The terms were set. The game was over. He was finally and completely in control of his own future.